Hey guys, thanks for joining us here. If you haven't had a chance, check out our Into the Unknown video we put out from our Frank Church Wilderness hunt. Following that hunt, we just wanted to do a little recap here to help some people out that might be planning the same thing. So we did a fly-in hunt into the Frank Church Wilderness, did some research. Kind of why we landed on the name Into the Unknown is just because there's not much you can find, not much we could find anyway out there in terms of information on where to go, specific locations. So we rounded up as much information as we could through podcasts, stuff like that. And then also, as we dug further and leaned on some of the aviation companies, they can share a little bit of information for you. So if you're thinking about that hunt, don't hesitate to reach out to some of the fly-in companies and they might share some stuff with you. So we flew in and we decided to do a 9-day hunt. We had 3 of us guys, Corey, myself, and Spencer. And 9 days is a lot of time, but we ended up using almost every single day to fill 3 mule deer tags. We decided against an elk tag just because we didn't want to put ourselves in a position where we'd be packing something out a really long ways in that really thick, nasty, rugged country. So that was a decision we made, and just in our experience, having the extra time was well worth it. So to dig into a few things, we wanted to talk about a few gear items that worked really well for us, and some things that didn't work well. For those of you that might be planning a similar hunt, it was our first time in extreme conditions, and we had planned to backpack out for 3 or 4 nights at a time. And these cold temperatures were not something we were used to. So we have a few items that worked and a few that didn't, and Corey's going to kick it off here.
So one huge failure on our part, well my part, would be the sleeping bag. So I brought a zero degree bag with me. I've had this bag for a while, 6 or 7 years now. Bought it from Sportsman's. Didn't do my research. Thought it would hold up. I froze, definitely. I had a good insulated sleeping pad, but for this bag, even though it says 0 degree, I didn't dive into. It's like a R rating or.
Yeah, it would be your synthetic insulation versus down insulation. That was a big one.
Yeah.
And then just the compressibility of the bag, and then kind of. How warm it would be for the type of insulation that it was.
So ultimately, it didn't work. So I was sleeping in my first light jacket, which Brian will talk about a little bit later. All my layers. So this was one epic failure. If I could go back, I would invest into a better sleeping bag. So definitely do your research there. One thing that saved me that Brian will talk about right now is our sleeping system, our tent system and stove.
Yeah, so our shelter was a big one. We had heard some pros and cons of running like a hot tent, so we decided to try that route. I was able to find Seek Outside Cimarron. So this is a packed up Cimarron that has the stakes inside of it. And if we double check here, it ended up being a good option right at just over 3 pounds, so 3 pounds 10 ounces. And this one does have the screens, which are an extra added feature, not something I would get if I was to buy it brand new, but I was able to pick that up used. So the benefit of the Cimarron is we could run the stove. So the full package for the Cimarron is the tent. You're going to run a center pole. So I went with the REI center pole. Saved a lot of money versus some of the carbon options out there, and you're only at like 13 ounces total. So that ended up being a nice setup. And then in addition to that, we ran the Light Outdoors stove. So that's a titanium stove. Comes in, let's see, both pieces here. Comes in at just over 2 pounds. So we're about a little over 5 pounds for the full shelter. And we were able to distribute that between the 3 of us. So one person would pack the body, one person would pack the stove, and the other person with the stakes and the center pole. And that made it doable for us. And obviously the benefit to that was be able to warm up our tent at night and in the morning. which ended up being really useful in the sleeping bag situation.
Yeah, that stove was huge. We came in with, I don't know what Spencer was running for boots, but yours weren't insulated.
Yeah,
right?
I ran a non-insulated boot, which was not the best choice. Probably great for hiking around, but in the mornings and in the evenings, at a few times I had to loosen my boots and run some of the hand warmers down into my boots. And that's something I would highly suggest bringing along. So at our base camp, I had a full bag of just the packs of hand warmers that you can shake up. And I would bring a couple of those up for each day, and I'd throw them in my pockets. And running those non-insulated boots in the mornings when I was glassing, I'd have to loosen up my boots and stuff some hand warmers down in there. Or you could light a small fire or something like that. But the non-insulated boots were probably something I would advise against. If we were to do this hunt again, I'd go to a 200 or a 400 gram insulated boot.
Yeah, my feet were struggling, and I had a 400 gram insulated boot, and I was running. So one success here though is I was really happy that I bought these socks. So this is the Kinetrek Alaskan edition, so their heaviest sock, and then I was running these liners from Kinetrek as well. So there was couple mornings where we were in the low teens, where my boots were definitely frozen. My feet were feeling it, but the rest of the trip we were in the high teens, maybe low 20s, and I was perfectly fine with this setup in a 400 gram insulated boot. So
yeah, we would highly recommend. Both of us have gone to that system where we're running a liner sock with a heavier sock over the top. Seems to eliminate the chance for blisters. Not completely eliminate, but it's going to really help your chances of getting blisters, and just a little more comfortable as well. Some added padding. So one other thing we kind of mentioned so far was the puffy jacket. We both ran the First Light Chamberlain puffy, which is their heaviest downfill late season puffy jacket. So the nice thing is it is still a pretty light option, and it compresses pretty well for how warm this jacket is. So as you can see, it gets pretty small in your pack. So we were able to just stuff that into the top of our pack, no problem. Neither of us decided on puffy pants, and we will throw our clothing system in an Excel sheet and throw it on the video here just to give you an idea. But the puffy jacket was a lifesaver. I would definitely go with one of the heavier downfill puffy jackets if you're going to be down into the low teens. We had a couple mornings, we were pretty sure it dipped into single digits. Some really cold, clear mornings that were easily 10 degrees or maybe a tad below. So the jacket did amazing for the upper half of our body. And the puffy pants, were something that if you already had in your kit, I wouldn't hesitate to bring them. We just decided not to buy them specifically for this trip. So,
yeah, to speak to how warm that jacket is, I think both of us only ran our merino wool long sleeve shirts and quarter zips underneath that, and in the mornings it worked magic. So definitely recommend that jacket if you're going into a late season. Temperatures into the single digits. Definitely a solid setup.
Yeah, it's definitely a good one. They put a lot of features in that are great for glassing. Your pockets are in a great position to work still with your bino harness. You can throw those hand warmers in there, which is what I did in the morning when I'd glass. I'd keep my hands in there for a while and then bring them out when needed. So definitely a highly recommended piece of gear, or something very similar to that if you're going to be in those conditions. So
piggybacking off of glassing, so one thing that just going through and doing research and reading forums was people recommended this Thermarest glassing pad. So it's super lightweight, compacts. There's this little strap here, opens up. We were, elevation wise, we were up there, snow level. So when we were sitting down, we were definitely sitting in compact, it wasn't fresh powder, but compact snow. This almost, it felt like insulation. So I would sit down with it, obviously I would stay dry. My butt would stay warm. I could sit there for long periods of time, and I would highly recommend it. It weighs nothing. and it was definitely one of those things that was just an added pleasure to sit there and sit behind the glass.
Yeah, they're super cheap as well. It's something you can look up, but off the top of my head, I think they're only around 20 bucks. So definitely a piece of gear that doesn't add much weight to your pack, and you can use it in a lot of different features. You could throw it as a kind of an added pillow when you're asleep at night. So definitely a plus, and a pretty nice cheap piece of gear for something under 50 bucks. Like, that's probably one of the best things we used, for sure. So highly recommended on that. And then one other thing that we had heard about through a couple podcasts and a couple recommendations are these micro spikes. So we used these on our boots when we got up into the higher country where there was a lot of snow and ice. So these are a great setup. They strap around any boot, and you're going to run this spike that's going to give a lot of traction. So the only downside is obviously the way they're built. They're pretty heavy. You know, we had heard from some of the best hunters out there on podcasts and recommendations that they're worth the weight, and if they said that, we took it as gospel. So if we throw those on the scale, you're at 14 ounces, so I mean you're almost a pound, but you can leave them in the tent if you're hunting lower elevation if you don't need them for that day. And then we used them when we were up in the ice and the snow. Definitely highly recommended. You know, it's way better traction as you're going through a boulder field, or you're going over logs, or you're in some nasty stuff. Definitely a great thing to have, you know, so you can avoid injury, and super helpful on a pack out too. Some of our pack outs, because we did kill our bucks up higher, we started in snow and ice when we were packing meat, and that's when you really need something like that, because one slip or fall could be a pretty bad situation. So
yeah, I highly recommend those. There was a huge difference. I didn't strap those on. We were up in one location trying to find water, and Bryant was waiting for me for a good 10-15 minutes because I was struggling, slipping, falling. When he had those on, he just cruised right up and had no issue with getting up. It was probably like 200 or 300 feet of elevation, and he was definitely waiting on me. But when we're talking about hiking out, which Bryant just talked about, highly recommend trekking poles. I bought some entry-level trekking poles last year. They made it a couple weeks, so I think they were 30-40 bucks. Broke, snapped on me. We were hiking out Bryant's bull that he shot in Oregon in September. So I invested in some higher end ones. These are the Black Diamond Ergo Cork trekking poles. Love them. So I had no issues with them. Super lightweight, and they were a lifesaver. We were coming out on day 8 or 9 with my buck, his buck, camp, and it would have been miserable without these. Yeah. So highly recommend them. Super user friendly. One thing I also noticed that I heard good things about is usually on the trekking poles, at least entry level ones, they're twist, and those will give out. So when you twist and tighten them for certain measurements, eventually those will give out if they're not these snap-ons. So I really like that about it, and I haven't had any issues with like sand or dirt or anything getting in the way and these slipping back and forth. So if you get a chance, take a look at these Black Diamond trekking poles.
Yeah, definitely highly recommended. Mine worked well also, and as Corey mentioned, on our one of our main pack outs, we had 2 bucks, his buck, my buck, and then Spencer took most of our camp gear. We were able to weigh our packs, just adding up the meat and weighing our packs when we got home. And you know, we were around 130 pounds coming down the hill, and that was for about 6 miles. So that's when, you know, you don't feel like you need trekking poles all the time, but that's when they could keep a major injury from happening, or they're really necessary. So one little piece of gear I wanted to mention that was really nice for me. This is the Kufaru gun bearer. So I was able to run that, and this is the universal version. So I'll throw a picture in the video, but this mounts on the right side of your pack, or whichever side you want to put it on, and allows your rifle to be hands-free. right next to your body, but accessible in a matter of seconds. So I was able to glass, I was able to use my trekking poles, do everything, and have my rifle right next to me the whole time. Something I bought right before this hunt, and I wasn't sure how it would work out, but a lifesaver for sure. Another piece of gear that's not super expensive, and if you get this universal version, you can put it on any pack. We ran the Exo Mountain Gear packs. Been running those for a year now, and it mounts great on that. So that's another thing to think about. And mentioning the pack, one big thing I want to hit on is, we were in between a size of packs when we landed on the Exo pack, and we were really close to going with the 3500 versus the 5500 bag. So we landed on the 55 just for the versatility, and this is the first hunt where we actually used all that space. So the 35 is suitable for just about every other hunt we've done, but this late season hunt, staying out 3 or 4 days, you put some tents, the stove, a lot of food, and then you get some bigger packing stuff, the sleeping bag, the puffy jacket, and that space fills up really quick. So just something to think about in bag sizes. If you're going to do a late season hunt, the bigger bag size is highly recommended. So
one last thing, I don't really want to end on a failure, but the last thing I wanted to talk about was the bladder hose. So this was pretty much useless for us. So this would constantly freeze up. You would have to essentially take your pack off, pour some water out of your bladder. I don't have anyone in the comments if they recommend or have had any success with maybe the covers on these, and if maybe that eliminated the hose freezing up. But not only in the hose part did that freeze up, even in this valve right here where you turn it on and off, that was having issues as well. I think this even popped off at one point. So I pretty much, for a good 4 to 5 day span, wasn't able to use this. Just bringing an Nalgene bottle and have your drinking water there, being able to bring that into the tent with the stove and having that so it stays warm with you. We tried bringing this into the tent halfway through the trip, but even with that, it would still find a way. First thing in the morning, you would hook it on, drink a little bit of water, and just, 10-20 minutes into the hike, it would freeze back up. So
yeah, that was the problem. Is we were finding ways to kind of make it work, and if I was to go on that hunt again, I'm not sure if I would run it or not, like Corey said. But if you are really diligent about blowing that water back down your hose and back into the bladder, before you let it sit for a while, then it keeps that hose from freezing up. But sure enough, that's not the main thing we're thinking about during the hunt, so you'd forget pretty easily. And then obviously we'd bring them into the tents at night. But one thing we mentioned, the stove. The stoves are great, but the burn time is not all that long, so they're primarily used when we're cooking dinner at night, when we're hanging out around the stove. These late season hunts, you have 3 hours of sitting around in the tent unless you're going to go to sleep at 7 p.m. So while we were hanging out, we would run the stove and get it nice and warm. That way we could fall asleep, but it's only going to burn an hour and a half or so. So by the time we were all asleep, sleeping well, that stove would go out, and none of us really wanted to stay up and stoke that fire all night long. So there would be a pretty good chunk of time during the night where it would get really cold, and that's when stuff would start freezing unless we had it inside our sleeping bag with us. So batteries, we made sure we all brought external chargers, charge up our phones for our Onyx maps, and charge up our inReach. So the Garmin inReach is what we used for satellite communication. One super important thing with being in a wilderness area and in a really remote area was communication. There's obviously no cell service when you get into these wilderness areas, and we had to have a way to communicate safely back home. We knew our wives would be worried about us, other family members, and then we also needed to be able to communicate with the fly-in company if we needed to have them drop in and pick up meat. Or if there was some weather moving in, they needed to notify us if they had to pick us up early or late. That's one tricky thing about the wilderness areas is you're never really completely sure about weather, and it takes pretty good weather to fly, so you can have some variability in your days. But what we used to accomplish that was just the Garmin InReach. So this is the very base model. This is the SE. You can get this device itself for around 280 bucks. And then you just have to activate it with a plan through Garmin. Now I just use the safety plan, so that allows me to send any SOS emergency messages, of course, and then I can send preset text messages or custom text messages, and I can send like 10 per month. Pretty small fee if you go over, so there's a couple different plans you can choose from, but that one, you know, runs around 15-20 bucks a month, so it's a good option for us, and allowed us to check in back home with our wives and then communicate to the flying company like we mentioned. So those are a few things, you know, some of the main things we wanted to cover that really worked and helped us have a pretty successful hunt. And you know, we just wanted to put that out there, and if it helps in any way, great. And it's a great hunt, and we're looking forward to doing it again sometime.
Yeah, if you have any tips or anything that you caught in the video that would help someone else with a late season hunt, comment below and let us know what your thoughts are on the entire review.